welcome to this special Digital Foundry Direct. Today, covering the Halo campaign preview. We've had the luck to have a hands-on preview of the Xbox Series versions of this game, which is releasing its campaign on December 8th of 2021. And to talk about essentially our impressions, some technical information and the like, I'm joined by friend and colleague and Halo lover, John Linneman.
Hey Alex, it's good to be here. It's a momentous occasion, I think. It's a game that has been in development for so long, that has promised a lot, and there's so many questions I think we've had recently about both the game itself as well as the technology powering it, and finally we have some answers.
Yeah, we definitely do. And just to kind of contextualize what we're going to be talking about today, we had a preview version of the single-player campaign available on the Xbox consoles. We specifically looked at Xbox Series X primarily, but also a little bit on Xbox Series S. And in this preview version of the game, we could play essentially what are the first 4 missions, 2 of which are kind of like indoor, classic Halo, and then a little bit wider, spread out, open world light that we're seeing on this new Zeta Halo ring in this game, which is going to become really much known for in the future. And as a part of this, we will not be looking at the Xbox One, Xbox One S, PC. That's all going to come later on. John, your 4 missions of this game, the open world segment as well. What were your initial impressions of the gameplay?
I was really happy with the way the game opens, especially the first 2 stages, because I feel it follows very much the classic Halo formula. It's very similar to Halo 1, Halo 2. You're within sort of an indoor space, facing off against your enemies, in this case the Banished, but it's really just like the Covenant, basically. I like it. So this is the part where I thought it looked pretty good, right? Like it looks very Halo 1, but with its own sort of new take on it. And I like the scope of some of the interiors. There's that section at the end of the first mission that has you sort of platforming between sort of breaking chunks of environment. That was really interesting and nice looking. I love the integration of the grappling hook here. The core gunplay feels spot on, like it's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
So like on that sense, like it really does feel like they've nailed that. But I think it's the open world stuff that's more what we were curious about. And we can only talk about those first 4 missions or whatever, right? So it's very early in the game, but I am extremely relieved that it's not a Far Cry game, at least so far. Basically, I thought about this more. It seems like it could be more along the lines of an Arkham game, or maybe even a little bit Crysis, but still a little more open worldy than that. Where the idea is where it's like you have your objective, you can go there, but before you get there, there's other places you can visit, and they're optional. Like, for instance, one of my first experiences, I stopped like a little frontline base where you can like retrieve vehicles, and you take out the guys, take it over. Now you can summon in that it's like a mongoose looking thing, and drive it around, and that's kind of fun.
It is. It was nice to see that it was not the Far Cry formula,
Exactly.
which looked a lot like in that preview video, unfortunately. But I think, like you said, there's essentially a main mission objective that you can go to. Along the way, along that path to get there, there are some side things you can do, but you do not need to do, thankfully. At least it's not in the area we played so far. And the core missions, those first 2, really did feel like classic Halo.
I
and
agree.
I really did thoroughly enjoy them. They were great.
And I really think the optional stuff could actually be fun, because they do seem to be keeping things constrained so far. Like the problem with like Far Cry and the like is that you open it up and it's just like, bam, they just throw up all over your map, like Barfop. There's a million icons to explore. There's all these gauges to fill, like collect these items to get this, and then collect these items to get this other thing, and do all this and then do that. And I actually think that just drags the pacing down. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything important, right? Whereas with Halo so far, it does at least seem like taking over some of these installations kind of give you an immediate potential gameplay benefit. Like, oh, now I have access to this thing that I can now use to enter the next main mission. So the tower mission, right? So one of the things I liked about this, and this actually almost reminded me a little bit of something from playing PlanetSide back in the day, where the entry point there is this huge open area beneath the tower, and I found that you could just go in guns a-blazing. So at first I actually found a ghost out in the map. I went in there and just cleaned up everything using a ghost and sort of made my way through it. But then I discovered there's like a back way in, and you can like, I guess, lower shields maybe. I need to figure this out, but it looks like there's other ways to get into that installation that don't involve just blazing them through the front door, which is kind of cool. But everything is kept within, it's still relatively constrained in terms of where you go, but it does have a sense of freedom that was interesting, like the grappling hook, for instance. Like, I just randomly started climbing up these huge cliff sides and going up to areas that you probably aren't necessarily supposed to be at, but they kind of allow you to do it, which is fun because, you know, again, you look at something like Far Cry, you can get to everywhere just by just doing whatever walking that you're doing. You just hold up and you kind of go there. But here, like, actually making your way up, I'm almost reminded of climbing that tower in the center of Shadow of the Colossus, where you're not really supposed to get up there, but there's ways to do it. I'm sure this is a little more intentional, but it actually feels a little bit more fun and engaging as you're like learning to jump and use the grappling hook and trying to break your way up to the top, and it's good. Yeah,
to say the least, the grappling hook is a big hook into making the open world traversal in this game actually enjoyable. You're like swinging around, going up into places where you know, they probably designed it so that you could go there, but you're going there and it feels, you know, fun to actually get there, and you move really quickly. Like, one thing I actually did thoroughly enjoy, but we'll talk about it in another context later on, is that you can see pretty far into the distance to see a combat going on that's going off like right in front of you. Like, you can see here, I'm looking down at this valley, and you can see it looks like Marines are engaging with banished forces, and they're pretty far away. I don't know how many hundreds of meters, but to just like run down there actually didn't take that much time at all. So it felt natural, it felt quick, it didn't feel laborious to go around this early section of the game in this open world light area. Obviously, we can't speak for later in the game, but that was all positive, and it was very much so reassuring.
Plus, I like the fact that it is a Halo ring, and a Halo ring that's specifically kind of broken into pieces. It's like floating islands in the sky, and each island is kind of its own thing. It does seem relatively constrained, so it's a little more open than before, but there is constraint to the design. So I'm extremely encouraged by this early stuff that we've played.
Yeah, it's looking good. So other encouraging things that I thought we should talk about is, you know, we've been spending a lot of time talking about the gameplay, but a big part of our discussion originally on Halo Infinite, and one of the reasons probably why it was delayed a year, was due to the reaction of its visual presentation. And, you know, we're seeing near release code here of the single player campaign. John, what were some things that really caught your eye graphically here when you initially booted it up?
Those first two levels, I think, were excellent because they're very classic Halo, especially the second one, right? It's Forerunner style architecture.
Super Forerunner stuff.
Lots of the main thing though is, I think they've done a really good job with their sort of material system this time for materials that are like metal, or some of the Covenant or banished stuff, or the Forerunner stuff. Like, all of that stuff, I think, the way the light plays off the surface, and then they combine that with a really nice use of SSR, it actually looks really good, and it feels, I would say, distinctly improved over what your vision of Halo was, right? And it doesn't have that busier look that they went into with like Halo 4 and Halo 5 necessarily. So I kind of like stylistically there. And, you know, just other things like the quality of like their actual models, I think, are great. Like, the weapons themselves are really nice looking. The enemies that you face off against, if you look at them closely, they're very well realized. There's a lot of good stuff happening there. Plus, of course, you know, parallax maps in there.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time
those are awesome,
looking at
dude. Those look really, really good. But I think there's even more you have to say about this, of course. So I'll let you talk as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, so I definitely think the materials and like the trim sheets and all the stuff they're doing for the Covenant, Forerunner, and man-made structure stuff looks really, really good. When you get up close. Like, you walk around it and you're like, oh, that looks like a fully realized object. It looks definitely better than you saw, I would say, in Halo 5 or in any of the previous Halo games. And it looks similar in tonality, maybe not necessarily in colors, to the original Halo, but it's at least it does seem a lot less like that agreeably busy look that we saw in Halo 4 specifically.
Yeah.
And that's very encouraging. Color-wise, though, I always thought, like you were saying, the second level there, which is this really cool Forerunner area, it reminds me in terms of geometry, like very basically of Halo CE. But at the same time, color-wise, it did feel like a different direction slightly. Less pale blues, less, purples and things like that, like you saw there, but a little bit more modernized in some way that I cannot really tangibly
exactly. Also,
point out very well.
natively supports HDR, and in fact seems to do native Dolby Vision support even, which is it's a little different from the typical Dolby Vision implementation. So it looks really, really nice and vibrant. The highlights are used in a very strategic way. Like, it's not just like blast your face off brightness, but it's very carefully designed brightness levels. So like, explosions and specular highlights and bright lights and all that stuff, of course, show the brightness. But I guess we should talk a little bit about the quality and performance mode, because I played in both.
Yeah, sure.
So of course, quality mode on Series X is 60 frames per second, targeting a much higher resolution. It's not exactly native 4K though. It's sort
Definitely
of
not, no.
it does use dynamic resolution scaling quite a bit. And of course, performance mode then targets 120 hertz, and this one seems to drop all the way down to around 1080p, which I guess is understandable considering the cost of 120 hertz gameplay.
But you definitely notice it. You definitely see the reduction in resolution when you play this mode for sure.
So it's interesting. But I actually like this option. Like, usually quality performance means 30 and 60 or 30 and uncapped. So having it be 60 and 120 is a nice change of pace if you're on Series X, right?
Yeah, Series S is quite different. And this one caught us off by surprise because we were playing initially all through this on Series X. We were going to just kind of limit our platforms, but then we just thought, okay, let's try it on at least something else. Load up Series S here, and quality mode footage you're seeing here. If you notice, something's very different. This is running at 30 FPS, which is very different than what we saw in the multiplayer beta for this game, or the available multiplayer that you can play right now. So that is 30 FPS, and it looks like it's targeting 1080p. We'll have obviously more on that when the game comes out, but that's our initial impression.
Yeah, that was kind of shocking actually. I didn't get to play it on Series S myself, but I think you checked it out and Richard checked it out, and got a bunch of screenshots up here, and I was surprised that it's only 1080p at 30 frames per second, to be honest. But there is at least a performance mode as well, and that one I think goes up to 60. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. And that one is dipping though a little bit in combat, but not as much as you'd think based upon what you saw in that quality mode, which seems to just be almost like straight 1080p. One thing to also talk about in both Xbox Series X and Series S here is there is the usage of variable rate shading, which if you stop and look at an image and you just like zoom in really close, you'll definitely see it. But I would say on average...
Don't you dare do that, Alex. Don't you dare bring up those 400% zooms. Don't do it. No, don't do it. Don't do it. You'll see it if you do look close, but honestly, I don't actually think you notice it that much, especially on Series X. The one thing you will notice though, I would say the game's like TAA presentation, it looks pretty okay when you sit still, but in motion, you definitely get the sense that there's a little bit of softness there. That was the weirdest thing for me actually, because when you stop, it looks sharp. But as soon as you start to move, there's like this sense that you're like losing clarity immediately. It becomes very soft. I do prefer playing with black frame insertion on this game because obviously it doesn't use motion blur. Unfortunately, I would have loved the option for per object motion blur at least.
Same.
So with black frame insertion, the motion is very clean, so you can kind of see it changing whether you're standing still or moving. But either way, it's fine enough, at least on Series X where I've seen, by and large.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Okay, so we've talked about some, positive visual things, the general gameplay, but now this is where we're going to get into a section of the video that we want to obviously reserve a couple things for the final reviews of the PC code and the Xbox Series X code in the end. But just, we had some initial impressions, some positive ones and some less than positive ones. So we're putting this bit at the end of the video here where we talk about things that we noticed that really stood out to our eye that we hope 343 can eventually change in this game.
If 343 is watching this video, this is the part to pay attention to, because a lot of these complaints are things that I think everybody would like to see fixed or changed. Not everything here could be, but there's some things, some of the decisions they made are very, very unusual, and I'm not entirely sure why it's this way. Actually, before we even get to the in-game visuals, and this is just super nitpicky, I suppose, but like you start it up, it starts with a pre-rendered cutscene, right? That's fine.
That we can't show, by the way.
We can't even show this right now, but it shows a pre-rendered cutscene.
Imagine it.
First thing, black levels are wrong. So it's a black bar cutscene, right? On top and bottom black bars because it's ultra wide. It's super washed out. I don't know why. The black levels are incorrectly set. And the actual playback is really choppy. I railed on Ubisoft for this before, like with one of their Assassin's Creed games where you load it up and the first thing you see is a choppy pre-rendered FMV.
It's terrible.
I'm like, guys, this just makes a bad first impression. But ultimately, the video isn't that important. It's just like a thing where it's like you want to put your best foot forward. So just get that out there. But then the actual cutscenes start, right?
This is where the big issue comes in because Halo is a game targeting 60 FPS, and it's doing. We'll have the metrics when the review comes out, but it's doing a good enough job at it. The only problem is in the cutscenes of the game, you're not actually seeing the fruits of that 60 FPS presentation because the animations of the cutscenes themselves, that means the camera, the movement of the characters, nearly everything except for things like TAA updating and maybe a particle here or there, all that is running at animation rates that are not 60, and it's doing it in a most strange fashion where I counted once like repeat animation frames every 2 frames, then every 3 frames, then every 4, then 6, then 5, then every 2 again. It made no sense. This makes it so that the cutscene playback, these emotional, really nicely directed cutscenes with smooth camera pans. It's all like trying to do like, single camera kind of stuff with a lack of cuts. It all looks very jittery and not 60 FPS, and sometimes doesn't even look 30 FPS due to the way it's done. So it doesn't look good, unfortunately.
And this really kind of weirded me out. Maybe you can show this here. I went back and looked at Halo 5's cutscenes. And I was kind of reminded that for the time especially, they looked really good, right? They're very, very consistent. The game was 60, but the cutscenes were 30 and native 1080p on regular Xbox One, if I recall. I actually think Halo Infinite's cutscene presentation is a step down from Halo 5 in that sense. Because of all this weirdness with the performance. And then to add on to that, so you have the inconsistent animation rate and choppy camera movement, and then there's the facial animation stuff. That's the stuff that really baffled me, where all the facial capture, like the lip sync, especially for the banished enemies, it's all at 30 frames per second, right? So especially if you're in the 120 hertz mode, every time they speak into the camera, their face updates at a very low rate, and it just looks weird, almost like stop motion animation at times. And again, like this is so out of character for what 343 has done in the past in terms of like cutscene animation quality. So I don't know what's going on there. Like I'd hate to say it, but I feel like the first fix that they should implement, at least to get this looking good for launch, is just cap the cutscenes at 30. At least on the consoles, moment, right? Yeah. Just put a 30 FPS cap in there. Try to make sure that they play back in an even rate. That will help so much with the presentation. This has nothing to do with the console or the hardware, I don't believe, because you'll see like when it transitions between gameplay and cutscene, you have perfect smooth camera motion in the gameplay, and then it switches to cutscene mode, and it just immediately becomes choppy. And there's no obvious reason why I should be doing that. I think it's just something with the way they've set it up. So let's hope they change this.
Another thing that I hope they change that moves in a similar direction is a variety of the animations and some of them that you constantly are doing in the game, whether that be shooting, reloading, or most importantly, mantling and swinging with your grappling hook. All those things run at frame rates animation-wise, which are not 60. It's below 60, some level below 60. I don't have the time to count all these animations for this video. That's not my job, but it's visibly there. And so there'll be moments like when you'll see me here, I'll just grapple onto something, and then I'll go up onto the ledge, and all of a sudden it looks like the frame rate dropped. But no, that's not the game, it's the animation actually. And this is for so many things in the game. In the 60 hertz mode and in the 120 hertz mode, there's also some weirdness regarding some animations only being at 60 as well too. But this is another aspect of the game where the frame rate is good enough and the motion fluidity should be there, but due to the animations, unfortunately, it's not the case.
I agree completely, and that's it's just another weird thing. And again, it's not. None of these things are game breaking, right? Like, this is still, I like how this plays a lot, and there's a lot of good here, but these are things that I think should be fixed, basically, and it would be helpful for everyone. So anybody watching this that's annoyed at hearing these things, please don't be annoyed by this. This is constructive criticism. This is the kind of stuff you want to get fixed, and at least based on their track record with the Master Chief Collection, 343 has shown themselves willing to listen to this kind of feedback, right? I mean, they've done so much work on that, including implementing like original Xbox features to ensure that it looked correct again, even years and years after it released. So I do believe that, and I hope that they can actually look at this stuff and be like, okay, we can find a way to correct this.
Yeah, especially for stuff like grenade throwing, which is also like not the right frame rate. Like that's like basic core, the three pillars of Halo: grenades, melee, and shooting.
Grenades and grapple, though, you do a lot in this game, so you see it
so
lot.
Much.
And again,
you see it a lot.
None of this stuff has anything to do with the consoles. This is all just decisions that these guys made with the way their game works. It's going to have the same problem on the PC. So
unfortunately. Okay, so that's the way it is right now. There's other things that we could probably talk about in terms of visuals that that we were a little bit surprised about, their like visual quality or something like that regarding the open world stuff. But that in the end is something we're going to have to probably leave for our review videos that will be coming out around the time of this game release, where we'll focus on very in-depth stuff about the open world design and visual quality there. But John, thank you so much for talking to me about this Halo Infinite campaign preview that we had access to.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it because, despite these complaints at the end, I still actually had a really good time with this, and I'm
for sure.
I do think the game itself is shaping up very nicely. I like the direction the campaign's going, and I'm curious to see where it goes and what kind of momentum it builds. And the storytelling so far at least has me intrigued in terms of where they're going. And I just appreciate that it doesn't feel like a whole galactic story anymore, right? It does feel smaller in scope, more like the original Halo, which I think is intriguing. So let's see how it goes. Let's
definitely see how it goes. But if you did like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out, join DF's Patreon to get years worth of our content in high quality for download and have access to our Discord server to talk to us behind the scenes. If you want to talk to John or myself about this video and the content therein, well, write a comment below or follow us on Twitter. And as always, this is Alex saying Auf Wiedersehen und
Tschüss.